serious. People who have been committed to psych wards and mental hospitals and later got better and were released. What was your experience? Story 1. I've been to a few different psych wards in the US in my 45 years living with schizophrenia, major depression, and anxiety. My first trip was in 1995, and my latest trip was last October. I'll focus on my latest experience as it was the best and the one I memorate the mostest. I had been struggling with schizophrenia and depression for almost 2 years at that point. I went to the psych ward for about a week in April 2021, but when I got out, I couldn't find the help I needed and continued to suffer. In a psychotic episode last July, I quit my job and planned to leave my husband and parents to move to another state, get on disability, and live my life alone. When I felt better the next day, I was so lucky the dean of my library, I'm an academic librarian, gave me the opportunity to retract my decision to quit and let me go on FMLA instead. I did that, but continued to suffer. In the middle of October, I took a lot of sleeping pills in an attempt, but woke up. I told my husband what I had done, and we called the crisis line. They told me to go to the ER, which we did. They immediately took away my belongings, including my clothes. I had to sit in a hospital gown in the hallway of an ER ward with nothing but my thoughts all day. It was. I suggest you do not go to ER, but try to call psych wards and go directly there. When I got to the psych hospital, it was around 10 p.m. They had some dinner saved for me, so I ate. Then I went to bed. I had a shared room with one other person, but there was a wall between our beds. We shared a sink and bathroom. It varies from ward to ward, but my ward didn't allow any electronics. Clothing was restricted to stuff with no zippers or strings. I have slipper shoes that I could wear. Otherwise, you're given sockies with grippers on the bottom. Hubby brought my items the next day, including a book and toiletries that were kept behind the desk until needed. He was also allowed to bring me soda in plastic bottles, so that was very nice. On the acute ward, there are group activities a few times a day, but they were silly like origami and not therapeutic. The ward housed both men and women, but your roommate was the same gender. Trans people were allowed their own room at this ward. Mostly, we watched the community TV. Most people are friendly, but I don't socialize much. One 19-year-old was very angry about staying and would frequently shout at the staff but was no danger. We had 3 crappy meals a day with snacks available on demand. Once a day, those approved by their doctors could leave the ward. If it was nice out, we would go to the basketball area and then the koi pond, and if it wasn't nice out, we would go to the workout and art area. A therapist is supposed to see you once a day, but they were short-staffed and I didn't see her but twice. When I complained, they suggested a new ward for me that focused on therapy. This new ward was much smaller. It was much the same setup as the acute ward, but we had group therapy all day, and the therapy focused on DBT. I actually socialized on this ward and we were all pretty close. I got another therapist who I did see every day. I also saw the psychiatrist every day, and he even asked before upping my antipsychotic. The DBT was extremely helpful for my depression and anxiety. Before I left, they suggested I go into their intensive outpatient program. It was 20 sessions of group therapy for 4 hours each session. They focused on CBT and a little DBT. 4 other ladies from my ward also attended while I did. Each week focused on a different topic, such as anxiety, depression, interpersonal relations, etc. Overall, it was a lifesaver for me. It brought me out of my episode and gave me tools for daily life and for the next episode should one happen. I hope this helps. Feel free to contact me with any questions. Story 2. Had to go to one post-accident because I had minor brain damage. Mental wards have a lot of different sectors and people are treated differently per sector. E.g., the suicide survivors have a lot of security constantly, while my ward was just a few nurses making sure we didn't fall over or something. My experience was about that same of an old person's home. Just some nurse checking on me every few mins like, need help to pee? Or, you hungry? 710, okay, stay. Story 3. I just got out 2 weeks ago. Checked myself in because I was feeling suicidal and had started harming myself. They switched up my meds, taught me some coping skills, and lined up therapy to support me after release. Not really a big deal for me, but I wasn't an aggressive patient. Other patients had a harder time, certainly. Story 5. Thorazine shots. In the wild, grown men pin you down because you're a super confused, scared, out of touch with reality teenager who was abused to the point of being scared of grown men, which obviously would make the situation worse when it's grown men forcing your body to their will. Kinda re-triggers the abuse. Now I'm old and wise enough to know what not to say when dealing with psychiatric professionals, so I don't end up manhandled and thrown in a straitjacket in a padded room doped up on Thorazine. Wouldn't say I'm better, but I know what people don't want to hear. Edit. This was late 90s, early Oros, and my experience wasn't the norm. When I say I know what not to say, is because the first time I got a Thorazine shot in the and a straight jacket was because I told the doctor I was battling demons, my trauma, metaphorically, and because of my psychotic episodes that led to hospitalization, it would seem the doctor at the time thought I had delusions of real demons. That first miscommunication misunderstanding led to a lot of crazy behavior on my part, because it just fueled my paranoia that people were out to get me. Real therapy outside the confines of a psychiatric unit helped me heal. That's all I meant by my post. Story 6. Hey, I don't know if this counts or not, but I was having a rough time 2 weeks after getting out of jail. Things were just particularly heavy during those times, and I didn't want to be alone. If I went to a bar, it might invite sympathy and unwanted attempts at conversation. Plus, I was afraid I might take to drink and do something really stupid. So I went to a nearby mental hospital and just sat in waiting room shocker reception area. I figured everyone there would have problems, so a man sitting there crying by himself wouldn't be too out of the ordinary. Anyways, long story short, they tell me they have to keep for me a little while to make sure I'm okay. The entire time was kind of a blur. I don't even remember how long I was in there. It wasn't more than 3 days, though. Shitty part was we got stuck with a significant medical bill. I kept telling them I was handling and that I was just needing to sit in an area with other people. Kind of feel like I got shook down, but I know they meant well. Story 6. Havenwick Hospital in Michigan, due to suicide attempts, 16, 17, and 18, after losing my mom. Think of it like kindergarten for grown-ups. Lots of group story time, lots of coloring, lots of coping mechanisms. That one was always heavily stressed. You sleep on a thin mat on a bed frame with a few sheets, also like kindergarten. Everyone is crazy, some crazier than others. You wind up making friends with bad influences. They psych visits you for like 3 minutes, gives you 8 diagnoses and 4 pills to take by your second day. You leave in about a week. That shower is cold, man. Nothing feels better than getting out of those sticky dot socks and having a hot shower at home. The lessons will stick with you. So will the people. Your job is to not go back. When I went as an adult, that was a bit different. You're in charge of your own paperwork and not many people will make friends with you. They are all focused on themselves. Which is better than the crazy teenagers. Story 7. I checked myself in and stayed for 2 months. I met a lot of wonderful people. We had a lot of fun together. I found out about how ECT affects people and could compare it to TMS. ECT is electroshock therapy, and TMS is trans something magnetic something. Both have bad reps, but both are really interesting. I met a guy who was in there because he claimed during court that he had a mental illness that led to his behavior. He was the only person there who was committed. He was my roommate for like a week, but then suddenly he decided to scale the wall and just fucky off ski. I don't doubt he ended up getting put in jail, which is a shame. One time when we were taking about our medications, he started yelling, "Hey, these assholes have drugs." And that was really fucking funny. My stay was a wild ride. I left with a pretty good medication schedule. I was lucky because I was able to get better while it was still allowed to smoke in psych wards. As a writer, I am glad for the memory of that time, but I would not like to go through it again without private health insurance. Story 8. In general, I remember useless, overly punitive rules enforced because of singular incidents. The worst one was, of course, no electronic devices because at some point someone complained online and got one of the doctors in trouble. Most of the other ones were about the meds, like you down the pills with water, the nurse looks in your mouth to make sure you swallowed them, and then you have to sit still in their view for 10 minutes to make sure you don't regurgitate them or something. And the evening pills, which I thankfully didn't have, had to be crushed into a fine powder and ingested that way. It was slow, there's a line waiting, loud as probably tiring for the nurse who had to smash the pills with like a paperweight or some. And on top of that, powdered pills are pretty bitter. Only the evening pills had to be crushed this way, mostly for the same patients as the morning ones, which didn't. I actually have no explanation for this one. Also, absolutely awful food. Story 9. Copy from a thread I posted in last week. I admitted myself to a crisis stabilization unit due to the worst panic attack I've ever felt. I started having closed-eye visuals, could barely breathe, and my chest felt cold. I didn't just think I was dying. I felt like I was dying. There were always volunteers posted at all times, patrolling the central room. Every chair and table was bolted down. You couldn't use the bathroom without being accompanied. The DVD cabinet and TV were behind reinforced plastic. The only writing utensils were soft tip markers. People were there and kicking and screaming. A roommate screamed and thrashed his slide bed and made a hole in the wall. Another roommate was in there for 3 months before me and was still there when I left. I left after 4 days. I wouldn't wish that on any of the people who have hurt me, ever. Story 10. I checked myself in, and I made a decision to solely commit myself to the process of healing. To utilize every single tool I was given to get better, even if it felt silly or stupid in the moment. I was ready to leave this earth. I didn't want any part of being alive in any sense. I don't know what it was, but I wanted to try. I embraced the therapy. I took part in the group exercises, art discussions. I journaled every day about my experience, and I made an effort to know the other stories and lessons and why they were there. I truthfully don't think I would be alive today had I not gone to the psych ward. Even having the space to be able to solely focus on healing and nothing else was most beneficial. I came out of there and committed to an outpatient program to keep myself accountable, and I still go to therapy today. Healing and learning to cope has been a long journey. I continue to be on it every day I wake up. I realize I had been incredibly lucky with the psych ward I was hospitalized in. The staff was amazing and they had a really great program. One nurse named Janet even just held me as I sobbed on my bed. Not every experience is going to be like that, but I am incredibly grateful for my experience. Story 11. Horribly traumatizing and dehumanizing. Basically abuse under the guise of keeping you safe. It really helped drive home that mental help was actually just to uphold Judeo-Christian societal ideals, such as suicide being sinful, and not actually help improve people's situations. Story 12. When I was in high school, I was bullied a lot, and my home life was so I attempted suicide twice, and they put me in a psych ward after my second attempt. I was never officially admitted BC. I lied my off to the doctors, but there was one guy strapped to a bed in the same room as me, and his eyes were completely empty. I remember just sitting in that room for hours looking at this dude stare off into nothingness. IDKY, but it freaked me TF out and I haven't self-harmed since then. Story 13. I was given a strong choice of inpatient or partial and took the PHP. I had a blast, really. Free lunch, short days, met a bunch of people, found out I was bipolar, etc. Story 14. I was committed about 5 years ago during my senior year of high school when I was depressed to the point I was suicidal, along with hearing voices which most certainly weren't real. I stayed for about 2 weeks, if I recall, and it was a good experience for me. I met a lot of wonderful people I wouldn't have met otherwise, and for those 2 weeks, it was as if it was a little community of just us trying to help each other. We had our varying problems and strifes, but the majority of people still looked out for each other. The biggest part for me, though, was that it was a break. We didn't have our phones or a computer that could access any social media. Spotify was the only program we could get to work on it, and it felt as if the world was on pause. What was happening outside didn't matter. I could finally just hit the pause button and not have to worry for once in my life. I got medicated. I took part in the group therapy, which is an important step if you wanted to leave. You can choose not to, but your stay will be extended if you didn't. We were at the top floors of a hospital, where all we had was a few jigsaw puzzles, an old Wii with Wii Sports, a computer with Spotify, and books along one wall. And it was great. By the end of my stay, I was ready to leave and get back into the world, as much as I had come to care for the people there with me. I still find myself to this day sometimes wanting to go back, purely because it was organized, and the pause button on life is, oh, so tempting sometimes, but I'm getting through it. Shout out to Lucy and Pete. Y'all were great. Story 15. I was in a children's facility for 5 days after a suicide attempt in middle school. Genuinely one of the worst experiences of my life. More than half the people in there with me were total assholes, and I was just a depressed autistic kid way out of my depth. Several were violent. 2 bullied me for my sexuality. It was Texas, so what did I really expect? In front of the adults present, who did nothing. And in general, I just don't think group therapy works for this kind of situation. Maybe it would have worked better if we were adults, And I have a friend who went to Narcotics Anonymous meetings in high school, and that worked for her. But it was generally an awful experience. I can see how group therapy would work in a support group setting, but it really doesn't when it's a group of mentally ill children with adults caring for them that don't even seem to give a. The conditions were horrible, and we were treated like animals. Fuck the US's mental health care system. Story 16. I checked myself into the psych ward a few years ago because I thought it was the only option to get the ball rolling to get help. It didn't help, sadly. Bit of background. I come from an abusive household and was first seeing a therapist at age 8 for self-harm. Prior to my hospitalization, I have attempted to seek mental health help 2 other times in my life. Generally, I just white-knuckle my depression and bipolar because I can't find any treatment that helps. In 2019, I knew I was about to hit my breaking point. Started to have frequent panic attacks, self-harming myself again. I tried calling a dozen places, but no one was willing to see me, and if there was a slight chance it would be 3 months out. I couldn't take it, so I went to the best mental health hospital in my city, third best in the country, basically saying, do I have to put a gun to my head in order to get help? Only notable thing about intake was the security guard watching me said to their colleague, got another suicidal I gotta watch. I blew up at them, asking not to say such dehumanizing things. I eventually calmed down after a screaming match and being threatened with handcuffs. Being there wasn't that bad. I was in the less secure area so we could use our phones on occasion. I tried to go to every group session possible. I walked as much as I could listening to music. I tried to journal out plans for how I could do a better schedule once I'm out. I talked to lots of interesting people, a lot of people in my shoes who were suicidal and just couldn't find the help. When I finally got the nerve to answer my mom's calls back, she really didn't care I was in there. See, she had cancer that reached her brain 10 years ago, and dementia was setting in. When I was 14, she pulled a knife on me, lied in court, and I had to go through therapy instead of her. When I told her I was in the hospital, she was like, oh, okay, just like last time, and started to complain about the house needing painting. Fun stuff. I was there for 3 days. Over a long weekend, said normally they would discharge me after a day. Promised to find me outpatient care. But that was a fucking joke. See, one of the things I talked to my psychiatric team was how, 7 years prior, I worked with a specific for-profit therapy organization, and one doctor I felt abused by because he didn't listen to me and gave me an antipsychotic medicine that a lot of other doctors were like, yeah, he shouldn't have done that. Guess where I was forced to go for group therapy after discharge? Yup, same for-profit organization. They also told me I would be doing depression group therapy, but when I got there, they mixed it up, and I was put in a substance abuse program. Had to get pretty angry and made sure after a day they put me in the right program. Also, part of my discharge was to keep working with my PCP, another hospital organization, to get long-term therapy. I was part of a bridge program for 9 months before they assigned me a long-term therapist or psychiatrist. Saw a rotation of 6 people in there. Even got taken off the list halfway, though, for some reason, which they refused to fix. The next one, 5-year with that hospital, I have other stories about how fucked it was. So, yeah. Basically, trying to get mental health help can hurt you more if the system is broken AF. Story 17. I spent over 6 months in total in London's only private psychiatric hospital over a period of 5 years from 2011-2016. The first 3 times I was so unwell I wasn't allowed to leave unaccompanied. The hospital is a bit like a 4-star hotel in some ways, and very different to government-run facilities. But none of that matters as my experience inside was entirely dictated by how I was perceiving the world, which due to my psychosis and hugely uncontrollable manic mood swings and suicidal depression, meant that I could have been pretty much anywhere and the experience would have been awful. That said, there was a feeling of safety and quiet, and a great deal of routine. There was also a lot of medication. The other patients also made the stays interesting, as people with mental illness can be fascinating to talk to. On my first visit, I found a kindred spirit in someone also suffering with acute mania, and I recall never laughing so much. Unfortunately, she was transferred to a more secure facility, as she became too difficult for the staff to handle. Over those 5 years, I met some very interesting people, and being a $7,000 per week residence, most were quite wealthy. I interacted with minor royals, celebrities, and other wealthy business people, all of us finding ourselves in the same melting pot of broken people. I've not kept in touch with any of them. I've been well for over 5 years now, and enjoy a med-free life thanks to some drastic lifestyle changes. However, the memories of being unwell haunt me far more than being detained to a hospital. There's nothing glamorous about going into a mental hospital because you only go there when you're too unwell or too unsafe to be left in the outside world. Story 18. I am still in the mental hospital. Got kicked out for a week because my aunt was tested positive for COVID, even though I was tested negative 3 times. After I got back, they kicked me out of all groups and courses I was in. They deleted every single information they had about me and they separated me and me roommate. I wouldn't say that I'm getting better after over 8 weeks, but I'm in a safe environment where I don't have to be ashamed about myself and my condition. Story 19. I was committed for bipolar and anxiety disorder. My treatment went well, but one night a new man that had arrived that day came into my room unzipping his pants, heading for my bed. I screamed. The nurses came and got him, and then denied it had ever happened, even to me. They said I was a psych patent and didn't know what I was talking about, and no one would believe me anyway. But it did happen, and I was only in for depression and anxiety, not hallucinations. They got abusive when I insisted it happened, and they locked me in my room. It happened in Olive Branch, Mississippi at Parkwood. No matter how suicidal or depressed I get, I will never go to another mental hospital. Story 20. While not me, a family member was suicidal, 5150, and hospitalized a few weeks. She takes her meds, left a cult, and is now living her best life. It was life-saving and the best thing ever. Story 21. I was in one twice, both entirely different experiences. The first was a regular ward for depressed or suicidal people. It was generally mundane, just groups and watching TV. The second, I was placed on a crisis ward due to having attempted suicide. Absolute. Batshit violent patients physically hurting each other and 24/7 screaming. Story 22. It was super boring. There was only one TV in the lounge, and we mostly watched movies or whatever was on TV except at meals. Then it was time for the news. My roommate was pretty nice, although he was always fighting. The people were weirdos, but pot calling the kettle black, am I right? But still, they were nice. Talked to a lot of people, including a girl who thought she was an angel sent from God. Still, she was very nice. The food was okay, but bland. I was thankful that my parents brought food when they visited. Had my blood taken every other day, like everyone else. We got to go on the encased roof for an hour every weekday for outdoor time. There was a basketball court, so many played basketball. I usually napped on a yoga mat since it was the summer and nice out. Shaving was annoying. You had to ask, and they provided you with a razor and watched as you cleaned up your face. Haircuts were different, as this gigantic black man would do haircuts, usually playing some of his music that was awesome. Did I mention it was mostly boring? Was there for 2 months. Only saw one girl leave and come back a few weeks later. Story 23. I attempted suicide years ago. Cops followed the ambulance to the hospital and stayed there until a psychiatrist showed up. In my delusional, ultra-manic state, I thought they'd let me leave if I impressed upon all of them how much more brilliant I was than them, how I could manipulate every situation to resolve in my favor, and naturally, that I was not crazy. Shockingly, that did not work out so well. The state of Colorado committed me. After just 3 excruciatingly boring days, they released me to my dad, who had to promise me he was taking me back to Oregon with a plan for continued care. Everybody tried to help me, but a few years later I made an even more serious attempt. It wasn't until Lithium and my now wife came along that I became stabilized. We've been together 35 years now and have 3 great boys. I guess, if there's a moral to all this, seek professional help. Let drugs do their work, if that's what's needed. It's likely that a proper therapeutic dose will be something you realize is helpful when looking at stretches of time. And find someone to love and trust. I know, it's not that easy. But none of this will work if you don't live long enough to let it play out. Give yourself a chance. There's a perfect saying: suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Story 24. They never actually helped. I know I wasn't asked about bad outcomes. They just kept changing meds that my psychiatrist put me on 2 weeks ago. I haven't been in a mental hospital since 2020, and that was my 15th visit to psychiatric hospitals. I'd have my medication for 2 weeks and taking it, and doing good. And then it changes due to the hospital's dumb choices. Story 26. I was involuntary commitment. They put me in solitary for 25 hours with nobody to speak to, didn't feed me, nor give me water in the middle of summer. I was put in a room with a lady who woke me up in the middle of the night threatening to stab me. An old man ran naked through the facility being chased by 4 nurses. When I came out, I vowed to never return. It was awful. I was only there for 2 days. Story 26. I voluntarily checked myself in for SI. I don't want to go into detail, but I basically lost everything in my life all at once. I was put into a rehab unit. One of the worst decisions of my life. I'm not even going to talk about it because it was a severe trauma that ironically I had to work through on the outside with my personal therapist. I wasn't mistreated or abused, but I just saw some horrible, and the other patients were the opposite of pleasant. Just know that it was very bad and did more harm to me than good, other than show me there are people a lot worse off than I was. I would rather have been in prison and would have felt safer around inmates tbh. Also experienced some of the worst units, and yeah, heart goes out to a lot of people doing a lot worse off than I ever thought I was. I stayed over the weekend and was able to check myself out. My last day I was with the veterans unit, and it honestly was quite nice, very helpful, and exactly what I assumed I was getting myself into. Lots of group therapy and support. No complaints about that Ward 910 edit. I'll share a bit. In the first ward, it was 24/7 lights on. Couldn't do anything but watch TV and walk around for entertainment, limited phone calls, no freedom. Couldn't even use the bathroom without someone watching. While I was there, I picked up that it was for rehab and crisis until those patients were sorted. These patients were extremely aggressive and violent. Constant fights. Very violent fights. A few escape attempts. A lot of broken furniture. Saw someone just about kill themselves in a toilet. It was quite scary. One guy beat the out of another patient to the point they had to be taken to the ER. The nurses did all they could but understaffed severely, and these small ladies were no match for these people. I couldn't imagine working there. Screaming all the time also with a lot of really messed up people, unfortunately. Very combative and seemed few people wanted actual help. No group sessions either. I only saw a psychiatrist once, but I had a severe reaction to the medicine and refused treatment to check myself out and do outpatient with my therapist. He is the one who helped me get better, and of course my own dedication. Story 27. I was committed after checking myself into the ER after walking 2 miles with a bleeding arm from where I self-harmed. This was the culmination of many mental breakdowns and trouble with money. After I self-harmed, I knew I needed help regardless of what anyone else says, and I needed it now. Next day, they sent me to a psych ward. It was actually a nice experience. The staff were nice, and the psychiatrists were putting the time and effort into figuring out which medication cocktail worked best for me. Worst moments were when my roommate left early evening and was replaced in the middle of the night by a drunk deep into alcohol withdrawal. Another was when a neighbor screamed in the middle of the night and tried to get out of the building. Me being an introvert, it was nice to be isolated and taken care of for the first significant amount of time in my life, and I really didn't like the idea of leaving only to get hit with a massive medical bill for the stay. I eventually knew I had to leave because I would be letting my family down if I stayed. I was discharged 3 days later. Since leaving, my problems have persisted, but I needed that away time in order to recharge enough to take them on again. It also made me realize a few things about myself, such as a need I have of people to take me seriously, that my family cares more about me than I had guessed, and that I just generally am going to be dysfunctional in society. I still would like to find the perfect therapist that I can tell them everything I'm thinking. Haven't found one I trust that much yet. Story 28. It wasn't the hospital that made me better. That took a hell of a lot longer than a week. The hospital is for an emergency crisis to keep you safe and get you on enough medicine to safely go back into the world. Hospitals are for stabilization. Outpatient therapy is how you get better. Overall, I'd say putting a bunch of people with mental illness together isn't helpful. Talk about a stressful environment. I thought it was similar to putting criminals together in jail and expecting them to stop committing crimes. You learn from people around you. It did teach me to pretend I was better so I could get the out. If you're going to go, though, do it voluntarily because generally you'll get a better facility. I was there involuntarily for a suicide attempt, but the detox suicide unit was full. So they put me in with the long-term patients. I was taking time off from getting my undergrad in psychology, and this experience motivated me to finish my degree. I work in mental health now. Shit is fascinating. Story 29. Can't speak for myself, but I know someone who was repeatedly institutionalized as a disciplinary tactic and medicated to control it. As an adult, he refuses to go to counseling ever again, even though he could benefit from it. Story 30. Psych hospitals are a joke, from my experience. I don't think I'd ever say a psych ward helped me get better. I owe that to my therapist. It did keep me safe, but mostly I sat around and watched bad TV and ate bad food and didn't sleep worth. Story 31. I was sent to a mental hospital 11 years ago due to a suicide attempt, but also because I was talking back a lot, and my dad thought I was fucked up enough in the head to qualify. Since I'm autistic, I had to stay in the developmental disabilities ward. Pretty much the same thing as a regular ward, I'd say. Only we had to go to school and the teachers of our schools gave us schoolwork to do during our stay. Sometimes we would go on class trips. We went to the grocery store, a food pantry, and even a bowling alley at one point. The beds were. I didn't for 2 whole days, so I felt like I got a nasty cold thanks to a medication they made us take every day. They took away our electronic devices, and we could only get them at night if we were good, with the exception of one room with a couch and a TV. Really, the only good thing about it was the food. It was pretty good, and the lunchroom was huge. Had the feel of a fancy restaurant, almost. I remember that was the first time I tried patso bread, and I loved it. Also, we had pancakes every Sunday, which was pretty cool. I only stayed there for a month before I got out for good behavior. I still have depression to this day but haven't committed suicide since before the hospital admission. Would not recommend, though. Story 32. It was actually pretty good. For once in my life, I felt like I was seen as a human and not some joke. I was, I think, 16 at the time, and my whole life had consisted of no one ever taking me seriously and treating me like a zoo animal. I had been in therapy prior to being committed, and my view of therapists from experience was not very good to say the least. In my mind, and in the opinion of the therapist that was there, all my previous therapists were also part of the problem. Of course, once I got out, all that progress went down the drain because I went back into the environment that put me there in the first place. I went in because I thought no one cared about me, and those who did were dead set on trying to make my life. So I tried the only was of escape I could achieve at the time. The entire time I was in there, I was treated with the basic level of human decency, which was miles above what I was getting in my everyday life. So when I got out after a week, looked at my phone which had no missed calls or messages, went back to school where no one even knew I was gone for a week, and just overall treated as if nothing happened at all, I just reverted. It also didn't help that the mandatory therapy they put me in was with one of the therapists who started everything in the first place. So yeah, I debated trying something again to go back because it was better than being out. Eventually, I was able to put a stop to therapy and removed myself from all the toxicity in my life, and that helped a lot. I still refuse to get therapy, because in my experiences, the job title of therapist is a joke. They're just a person who printed off a piece of paper they got off Google Images and are free to ruin anyone's life they see fit. If they were a doctor, they would be sued into oblivion and arrested. Granted, I know they're not all like that, but I don't have the capacity to shop around for one that's actually halfway decent. There's only so much a person can take, and after years of, I'm at my limit. Just one session with a bad one would put me over the edge, and I'm not willing to go back to that dark place again.